He was abandoned by her husband years ago. Now, they meet again with him asking her for money on the street. Dear viewers, welcome to our channel. Subscribe to receive more stories every day. Years had passed since Claire's life had been turned upside down. The betrayal felt fresh even now, though she had worked hard to rebuild her life from the ground up. The foundation she started, a new start, was more than a charity. It was a personal testament to her resilience, representing the second chance she wished someone had offered her during her lowest moments. Every month, she and her team of volunteers would spend an evening in the heart of the city, providing food, blankets, and basic supplies to the homeless. It was a labor of love that reminded her of her journey and how far she'd come. She found comfort in the routine, in knowing she was making a difference in someone's life. Yet tonight, as she distributed sandwiches and hot drinks to the huddled figures along the sidewalk, she spotted someone who froze her in her tracks. There, amid the weary faces and tattered coats, was a figure she knew well. James, her ex-husband, stood at the corner, clutching a cardboard sign that read "Spare Change." He looked gaunt, with hollow cheeks and eyes shadowed by exhaustion and regret. His once proud posture was gone, replaced by a hunched form that seemed weighed down by more than just the cold. It was as if he had aged decades in the few years since she'd last seen him. Claire's heart raced, torn between shock, anger, and a surge of empathy she hadn't anticipated. James had left her suddenly years ago, with nothing but a brief note saying he needed to find himself. That note, left in the middle of their empty apartment, had been a brutal end to what she once believed was a lasting partnership. They had met young, fallen in love quickly, and built what she thought was a solid life together. But underneath James' charm lay a restlessness that Claire couldn't soothe, no matter how hard she tried. His departure had nearly destroyed her, but she had clawed her way back to a place of strength, focusing on building her foundation, helping others, and finally moving past the heartbreak. Now, seeing him like this stirred up feelings she thought she had buried. Part of her wanted to turn away, to pretend she hadn't seen him, but another part, a deeper, kinder part, compelled her to approach him. She was no stranger to pain, and in her years of working with the foundation, she had learned that people could fall far and fast. But it was strange to see this man, who had once been her entire world, now looking up at her from rock bottom. Summoning her resolve, Claire took a deep breath and walked toward him, clutching a cup of hot coffee in her hand. As she approached, James glanced up, his eyes widening with recognition. A flicker of surprise, then shame, crossed his face, and he quickly looked away, as if hoping she would disappear if he avoided her gaze. "James," she said quietly, extending the cup toward him. He looked up at her again, this time with a mix of gratitude and embarrassment. He took the coffee with trembling hands, the steam curling up between them as he held it close, as if savoring its warmth. "Claire," he murmured, his voice barely audible. I didn't expect," his sentence trailed off, and he stared down at the cup, his fingers wrapped tightly around it. She took in his appearance, noting the worn jacket, the scruffy beard, and the look of exhaustion etched deeply into his face. There was a vulnerability to him that she had never seen before, and it tugged at something in her, even after all these years. Memories of their time together flooded back, late nights talking about their dreams, the laughter, and the silent moments they had shared. It was a bittersweet reminder of the life they had once tried to build. For a long moment they stood in silence, the sounds of the city swirling around them. Claire could feel her heart pounding in her chest, a whirlwind of emotions threatening to spill over. She wasn't sure what she wanted to say, or even if she wanted to say anything at all. But finally she spoke. "What happened to you?" Her voice was soft, filled with a mixture of curiosity and sadness. James took a sip of the coffee, not meeting her eyes. "Life. It didn't go the way I thought it would." His voice was rough, strained, as if he hadn't spoken much in a long time. He glanced around, avoiding her gaze, and she could see the tension in his posture, the shame that kept him from facing her fully. For a moment, Claire considered letting it go, leaving him with his coffee and walking away. But she couldn't. She had built her life around helping people who had been left behind, people who had fallen through the cracks. And despite the hurt he had caused her, despite the betrayal and the years of loneliness that followed, she couldn't turn her back on him now. "Do you need help?" she asked cautiously, unsure of how he would respond. James hesitated, a flicker of hope flashing in his eyes before he quickly masked it. He looked at her, his gaze finally meeting hers, and she could see the pain and regret that had settled in those familiar eyes. I don't know," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I didn't expect to see you here, Claire. I didn't expect anyone to." He trailed off, as if he couldn't bring himself to say the words. Claire's heart softened, and she could feel a tear prickling at the corner of her eye. She blinked it away, trying to keep her emotions in check. This wasn't about them or the life they had shared. This was about a person in need, a person she had once loved, who had lost everything. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I can help you, James," she said gently. "But this isn't about us, and it's not about the past. This is just a chance. Nothing more." He nodded, seeming to understand, though there was a sadness in his eyes that spoke of unspoken words and regrets. He glanced down at his coffee, his hand still wrapped around it as if he were clinging to it for dear life. I don't deserve your help, Claire," he murmured, his voice choked with emotion. "After everything, I don't deserve anything from you." Claire shook her head. "Maybe not. But that doesn't mean you don't need it." They stood there in silence, the city lights casting a soft glow around them, the noise of the bustling street fading into the background. In that moment, Claire felt a sense of closure she hadn't realized she needed. She had moved on, yes, but there was something healing about being able to offer him kindness, even after everything he had put her through. After a few moments, Claire realized standing in the cold, holding a cup of coffee, wasn't going to change anything. Despite all the emotions churning within her, she felt a calmness, a clarity. She had made her peace with the past long ago, and offering him help now didn't feel like weakness. It felt like strength. She'd moved forward, built a life she was proud of, and standing here with James only solidified how far she'd come. "Let's sit down somewhere warm," she suggested, nodding toward a nearby cafe. It was modest but cozy, the kind of place that served as a refuge from the harshness of the city. James hesitated, looking around as if afraid someone might see him, but eventually, he nodded and followed her. Inside, they sat at a small table by the window. James looked out of place in the brightly lit cafe, his worn jacket and tired expression contrasting with the cheerful surroundings. He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup, his fingers trembling slightly as he took a sip. Claire observed him quietly, unsure of what to say. Memories of their life together continued to flicker in her mind, but she pushed them aside, focusing on the present. "So," she began, breaking the silence, "how long have you been living like this?" James shifted uncomfortably, his gaze fixed on the table. "It's been a while," he admitted. "After I left, I thought I'd find something better, something that made sense. But I just ended up drifting from one job to another, one city to the next. I was always chasing something, but I never quite knew what." He paused, a shadow of regret crossing his face. "And eventually, things just fell apart." His words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of all the decisions he had made, all the roads he had taken that had led him to this moment. Claire listened in silence, her heart aching with a strange mixture of empathy and distance. She remembered the restless ambition that had always simmered beneath his surface, the sense that he was never quite satisfied, never content with the life they had built together. It was that very restlessness that had driven him away, leaving her to pick up the pieces. "I tried to make it work, you know," he continued, his voice barely more than a whisper. "But every time I thought I was getting somewhere, it slipped through my fingers. I kept thinking I'd go back, find you, explain everything. But then more time passed and well, here we are." He laughed bitterly, a sound that seemed to contain years of pain and regret. Claire felt a pang of sadness, not for herself but for the man he had become, a man who had lost himself in his own pursuit of happiness. She could see now that he had been running not just from her but from himself, chasing an illusion that had ultimately left him with nothing. "James," she said softly, choosing her words carefully, "I know it's been hard. I can't imagine what you've been through. But life doesn't have to end here. You still have a chance to rebuild, to start over." He looked up at her. His eyes filled with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "I don't even know where to begin," he admitted. "I've messed up so badly. I don't deserve your help or anyone's." Claire shook her head, a gentle smile touching her lips. "Deserving or not, everyone deserves a second chance. And I'm willing to help you take that first step." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small card, sliding it across the table to him. "This is the contact information for a shelter we work with. They'll give you a warm bed, meals, and a chance to start volunteering, earning your way back." James stared at the card, his fingers tracing the edges as if it were something precious. He looked up at her, his expression one of cautious gratitude. "You'd really do that for me?" "Yes," she replied simply. "But understand, this isn't about us. This is just a step in the right direction. What you do from here is up to you." He nodded, his eyes filled with unshed tears. "Thank you, Claire. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," she replied. "Just make sure you don't waste this chance." They sat in silence, the warmth of the cafe enveloping them, and for the first time in years, Claire felt a sense of closure. She had spent so long carrying the weight of his departure, but now, seeing him here, broken and humbled, she realized that she didn't need an apology or an explanation. She had found her own peace, her own strength, and offering him this small act of kindness felt like a final chapter in their story. As they prepared to leave, James hesitated, glancing at her with an expression that held 1,000 unspoken words. "I know I hurt you," he said, his voice trembling. "I never meant to. But I was too selfish to see it then." Claire met his gaze, her own eyes steady. "I know," she replied. "And maybe, in a way, this is how it was supposed to end. We both needed to grow, to learn. I found my path, James. I hope you can find yours too." He nodded, a small, sad smile crossing his face. "I'll try." They walked out of the cafe, back into the cold night air. Claire watched him disappear down the street, clutching the card she had given him as if it were a lifeline. She felt a strange sense of release, as if a weight she hadn't even realized she was carrying had finally lifted. This was their goodbye, a farewell without bitterness or resentment, just two people who had shared a life once and were now free to follow their own separate paths. As she walked away, Claire felt an overwhelming sense of peace, knowing she had done all she could. She had given him a second chance, not because she owed it to him, but because it was who she had become. And in doing so, she had found closure, a way to finally put the past to rest. Days turned into weeks after their encounter, and Claire found herself returning to her usual routine, but with a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in years. Letting go of James, truly and completely, had freed her in ways she hadn't expected. She immersed herself in her foundation's work, her focus sharpened by the experience. If she had once built a new start as a means of healing her own wounds, now it felt like her purpose, an embodiment of everything she'd overcome. Meanwhile, word trickled back to Claire about James. The shelter director, with whom Claire had a long-standing partnership, told her that James had indeed shown up the day after their meeting. He had been hesitant, unsure, but ultimately he had stepped through the doors. Since then, he had been volunteering daily, helping to prepare meals, clean the facility, and even speak with new arrivals who were in desperate need of encouragement. The director's praise surprised her. James, it seemed, was finally finding a sense of purpose, even if it was only in its earliest stages. Despite the director's updates, Claire didn't visit him. She was glad to know he was taking positive steps, but she had no intention of becoming entangled in his life again. Her chapter with James was closed, and she wanted to respect that, for both their sakes. She hadn't told her friends or colleagues about her encounter with him, choosing instead to keep it as a quiet part of her personal journey. The experience had served as a reminder of who she was and what she valued, and that was enough. One crisp morning, however, as Claire was preparing to leave her office for an outreach event, she received a small envelope. It had been left at the front desk with her name written in familiar handwriting. She froze, the recognition immediate. Carefully, she opened it and found a short, simple note from James. "Claire, I wanted to thank you for everything. What you did for me that night wasn't just a second chance. It was a wake-up call. I'm working on myself step by step, trying to become the man I should have been back then. I know I'll never deserve your kindness, but please know that I am deeply grateful. James." Claire read the note twice, her heart swelling with a bittersweet warmth. It was a small gesture, but it meant more than he probably realized. In a way, it was the apology she had never received, an acknowledgement of the hurt he had caused. It was a final, quiet moment of closure, sealing their story with a sense of peace. As the weeks continued, Claire's foundation flourished. Inspired by her renewed sense of purpose, she expanded their services, partnering with other local organizations to create job training programs and counseling services. Every day, she encountered people who, like James, had fallen on hard times, people who needed a second chance to rebuild their lives. Her work filled her with fulfillment and joy, a constant reminder that she had chosen a path of healing and growth. One evening, as she was speaking with a group of volunteers, the shelter director approached her with a smile. "You know," he said, "James has really turned things around. He's been dedicated, even helping us lead a few sessions. I think he's found something he truly believes in, and it's making a difference." Claire smiled, a gentle sense of pride warming her heart. "I'm glad to hear that," she replied. "Everyone deserves a chance to find their way." The director nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I've been in this line of work a long time, and I've seen a lot of people come and go. But it's rare to see someone truly commit to change the way he has. I think he finally understands what he lost." Claire felt a small, quiet satisfaction. She didn't need to see James again, didn't need him to declare his regret or remorse. Knowing that he was changing, that he was working to become a better person, was enough. She had given him the opportunity, and he had chosen to take it. And for her, that was the real victory. Not in rekindling the past, but in watching someone she once cared for rise from his mistakes. Years passed, and Claire's foundation continued to grow, touching lives and changing futures. She remained a pillar of strength and compassion in the community, someone who had turned her own pain into a source of healing for others. Occasionally, she would hear of James, snippets of his progress and the work he was doing at the shelter. He had found stability, a humble job within the shelter's community program, and had become a voice of encouragement to others who, like him, had hit rock bottom. Their lives took separate paths, each finding fulfillment in their own way. Claire had found peace in her work and in the family of friends she had built around her. And James, having accepted his mistakes and learned from them, was finally living with purpose. They never crossed paths again, but Claire knew that their brief reunion had been the turning point both of them needed. In the end, the past became a stepping stone rather than a weight. They had found closure, not by reuniting or rekindling old flames, but by moving forward with new perspectives, embracing the lessons that their time together had taught them. And as Claire looked out over the faces of the people she helped, she knew that she had found something far more meaningful than revenge or reconciliation. She had found her purpose, her peace, and ultimately, her own richer heart. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. If you like this story, please subscribe to our channel to receive more stories every day. Share with us what you think of this story.